December 19th, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. You're looking through a fogged periscope at 12 German tanks crawling through the snow 800 yards away. Panzer IVs mostly, but there's a Tiger E at the front. The beast every American tanker has nightmares about. Behind them, half-tracks packed with infantry. Behind those, fuel trucks keeping this steel serpent alive. Your breath comes in shallow bursts. Not from fear, though God knows you're terrified, but from the cold that seeped into your bones after 3 days in this frozen metal coffin they call an M10 tank destroyer. You know exactly what those tanks are heading for. There's a vital crossroads 3 miles ahead. If they take it, they'll cut off supplies to the 101st Airborne Division, currently surrounded and dying slowly in Bastogne. Thousands of American paratroopers who are counting on that supply line staying open. Your radio is dead, static and silence. No way to reach command, no way to get permission. And your orders, the orders drilled into you through weeks of briefings, are crystal clear. Do not fire without authorization. Do not give away your position. Observe and report only. But here's the problem. By the time you can report, by the time authorization comes through, those tanks will be gone. The crossroads will fall. The paratroopers will be cut off completely. And you'll have followed orders while watching thousands of Americans die. You've been trained your whole military career to follow the chain of command, to wait for orders, to never, ever act independently. Breaking that rule could mean a court-martial, could mean disgrace, could mean the end of your career, or worse, but you can see something your commanders can't see. The German column is in a perfect kill zone, a narrow forest road with steep banks on both sides, no room to maneuver, vehicles packed tight in formation. And you've spent months studying German tactics, understanding their doctrine, learning their weaknesses. You know exactly where to hit them. Not the obvious targets, not the lead tank or the biggest threat, but the specific vehicles, 3rd, 6th, 8th, that will turn their disciplined formation into a burning traffic jam. One precisely calculated firing pattern could collapse the entire column, but only if you pull the trigger now. Without permission, without orders, without any authority except your own judgment and the knowledge that sometimes following rules means letting people die. Private First Class Ray Thompson adjusted the elevation dial on his gun, licked his lips, and made a decision that would change everything. Not just for him, not just for that German column, but for how the United States Army would think about battlefield initiative for the next 80 years. This is the story of the unauthorized firing pattern that shouldn't have worked, that violated every rule in the book, and that became required study material at Fort Sill Artillery School. The story of one man who broke orders to follow something deeper, the understanding that sometimes discipline means knowing when to disobey. 3 days earlier, inside a drafty Belgian farmhouse that served as forward headquarters for the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, Ray Thompson sat hunched over a cold metal desk while his commanding officer laid down the law. Captain Langston was a by-the-book officer from Pittsburgh, the kind of man who believed that military discipline was what separated American forces from the chaos of the enemy. He stood at the front of the room, breath visible in the freezing air, and addressed the assembled crews with absolute clarity. "No one fires without confirmation from command," Langston said flatly, making eye contact with each man in the room. "I don't care what you see out there. I don't care how close the enemy gets. We do not give away our position unless we receive explicit orders to engage. Is that understood?" The room was quiet. The men nodded. But beneath the surface of that obedient silence, there was tension. Everyone knew the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Outside these walls, the Battle of the Bulge was just beginning, and it was going terribly wrong. On December 16, 1944, just 3 days ago, the German Army had launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, its last major offensive on the Western Front. Under cover of fog and winter storms, over 200,000 German troops had smashed into American lines with more than 1,000 tanks and the element of complete surprise. The goal was audacious and desperate. Punch through the thinly defended Ardennes sector, capture the vital port of Antwerp, split the Allied armies in two, and force a negotiated peace that would allow Germany to focus all its resources on fighting the Soviets in the east. And for the first 48 hours, it was working. American lines buckled and broke. Entire units were overrun or surrounded. Some positions simply vanished overnight. No one knew if they'd retreated, been captured, or been annihilated. The front lines that had been stable for months were now fluid and deadly. Nobody knew for certain where friendly forces ended and enemy territory began. In that chaos, American commanders faced a nightmare scenario. The fog of war was so thick that friendly fire became as dangerous as enemy fire. Units were shooting at shadows, calling in artillery on positions that turned out to be American, mistaking retreating friendly forces for German advances. The confusion was getting men killed as surely as German shells. That's why Captain Langston's orders were so strict. In the chaos of the Bulge, discipline was the only thing preventing complete collapse. Every tank destroyer, every artillery piece, every weapon had to be controlled, coordinated, directed by command. Individual initiative, however well-intentioned, could lead to catastrophe. We have reports of German infiltrators in American uniforms, Langston continued. Commandos who speak perfect English, driving captured American vehicles, switching road signs, cutting phone lines, sowing confusion. So, unless you receive a direct order from a verified superior officer, you sit tight and observe. That's not cowardice, that's discipline. And discipline is what's going to win this battle. If you're finding this story compelling, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We tell the untold stories of W2 that changed everything. Drop a comment below if you've heard of Ray Thompson before. For Ray Thompson, those orders meant observation duty. He and his three-man crew had been assigned to a concealed position on a wooded ridge near Noville, a small crossroads town just north of Bastogne. Their M10 Wolverine tank destroyer was dug in under camouflage netting, positioned with excellent sight lines over a valley and the forest road that wound through it. The M10 was a purpose-built tank killer, faster and more maneuverable than a regular tank, with a powerful 3-inch gun that could punch through most German armor. But it sacrificed armor protection for speed. The M10's thin armor meant it couldn't trade blows with German tanks. It was a sniper, not a brawler. Hit first, hit hard, and reposition before the enemy could return fire. Thompson's position was textbook perfect for his mission. Observe enemy movements, track German columns, report their strength and direction, and wait for artillery or air support to handle the actual fighting. His job was intelligence gathering, not combat, so that's what he did. For 3 days, Thompson scanned the terrain through his Periscope, marking German movements in a small spiral notebook his mother had mailed him months ago. Tank tracks in the snow, fresh treads on the forest road, the sound of diesel engines echoing through the trees. He logged everything with methodical precision: range, bearing, wind speed, weather conditions. He sketched the terrain, marked potential firing positions, calculated angles and trajectories. The notebook became filled with diagrams and calculations that looked more like an engineer's workbook than a soldier's journal. Once, on the second day, Thompson tracked a lone Panzer creeping near a ravine for nearly an hour. He had a perfect shot, broadside, stationary, maybe 600 yards. His finger rested on the trigger. His crew watched him, waiting for the order, but no authorization came through the radio, and Thompson didn't fire. He watched the Panzer complete whatever reconnaissance it was conducting and roll away into the forest. The opportunity passed. The anger inside him burned. Every instinct, every hour of training, every tactical lesson he'd absorbed screamed at him to take that shot. But discipline held. He knew the rules. He understood the reasoning behind them. One wrong shot could reveal their position and bring down a German artillery barrage. One case of mistaken identity could mean dead Americans and his court-martial. But as the hours dragged on and more enemy traffic moved through the valley, the equation began to change in Thompson's mind. Was holding fire really the safer option? Or was blind obedience to rules written for different circumstances actually the more dangerous choice? Thompson wasn't reckless. His entire life had been built on precision, on understanding patterns, on calculated decisions. But he was beginning to understand that sometimes the calculated decision was to break the rules. He just didn't know yet that he'd soon be forced to make that choice. Raymond Charles. Thompson was not born to be a soldier. He grew up in western Kansas, in the kind of vast, flat emptiness where the horizon stretched forever and the only landmarks were grain silos and windmills. His father, Charles, ran a small engine repair shop in town, the kind of place where farmers brought broken tractors and asked if they could be fixed for cheap. His mother, Anna, taught 7th grade mathematics at the local school. Even as a boy, Ray saw the world through angles and equations. He could calculate the height of a grain silo by measuring the length of its shadow and doing the trigonometry in his head. When other kids played with slingshots, Ray was building one with a pulley system and counterweights, experimenting to see how far he could launch a rock with pure mechanical advantage. His father called him the calculator. His mother called him my little engineer. His classmates mostly just thought he was odd, the quiet kid who brought math, homework to social events and seemed more interested in how things worked than in having fun. He didn't enlist in the Army because he was itching for combat. He joined in 1942 because he wanted to study engineering, and the Army offered training, pay, and, theoretically, a future. He got the training. The pay wasn't much. The future depended entirely on surviving Europe. This is the kind of forgotten story that deserves to be told. If you're enjoying this deep dive, give this video a like and let the algorithm know you want more untold go-do-win-to history. By the time Thompson arrived in Normandy in June 1944, he was 22 years old and already looked 5 years older. The transition from Kansas farmland to European battlefield had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with time. His first combat experience came in the Norman hedgerows, that nightmare landscape of ancient earthen walls and sunken roads where the enemy could be 10 feet away, and you wouldn't know until bullets started flying. Thompson watched his friend Jimmy Delgado burn alive when a Panzer's shell caught their half-track in a roadside ditch. Another buddy, Frank Murray, stepped on a mine outside St. Lo and simply ceased to exist in a red mist. Thompson stopped believing in luck after that. He stopped believing in safe distances or guaranteed survival or any of the comfortable myths soldiers tell themselves to get through the day. Instead, he started believing in patterns and probability and the cold mathematics of survival. He studied German armor tactics with obsessive intensity. He learned how panzer columns moved, where they paused to refuel, how long it took for a turret to traverse from one target to another. He started carrying that spiral notebook everywhere, sketching every German vehicle he encountered, noting vulnerabilities, blind spots, the angle at which side armor was weakest. He didn't talk much. His crewmates called him the quiet clock, because when he did speak, it was short, direct, and usually timed precisely. But when it came to gunnery, he was deadly. Not flashy, not fast, just accurate. Predictably, methodically accurate. In the Army's view, Thompson was an exemplary soldier, disciplined, intelligent, calm under fire, technically proficient. What they didn't realize, what even his closest crewmates didn't fully understand, was that Ray Thompson wasn't just a gunner. He was a tactician, not just someone who pulled triggers, but someone who saw battlefields like chessboards, who understood that warfare was mathematics made lethal, and in 3 days, that quiet, angle-obsessed brain would rewrite the rules of engagement with a single, unauthorized firing sequence. Because sometimes war doesn't reward those who follow instructions. It rewards those who understand when breaking the rules is the only way to follow the deeper principle beneath them. On the morning of December 19, 1944, the fog lay thick and low across the Ardennes. It clung to the tree branches like smoke, reducing visibility to maybe 200 yards on a good sight line. Sound was distorted. Echoes bounced strangely through the forest, making it impossible to tell if that rumbling engine was a mile away or just around the bend. Thompson had been on watch since before dawn. his eyes aching from hours of staring through the periscope. The cold had seeped into his bones. His breath fogged inside the already cramped crew compartment of the M10. His hands, even inside thick gloves, were numb. Then, through the fog and falling snow, he saw them. First came the silhouette, unmistakable even in limited visibility. The Tiger I tank with its long 88mm gun and massive angular hull. The most feared German tank on the battlefield, capable of destroying any Allied armor from well outside return fire range. Behind the Tiger came more shapes emerging from the fog like ghosts materializing. Panzer IV tanks, efficient and deadly. Then half-tracks, their distinctive profiles clear even in the snow. Then support vehicles, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun bringing up the rear. Thompson's heart rate didn't increase. If anything, it slowed. His mind shifted into the analytical mode that had kept him alive through 6 months of combat. He started counting, calculating, assessing. 12 vehicles. Maybe more still hidden in the fog. A full armored assault column, moving with the disciplined precision that characterized German mechanized warfare. This wasn't a patrol or a reconnaissance element. This was a serious combat formation, and it was heading directly toward Noville. Thompson understood what that meant. Noville sat at a critical crossroads just north of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division was currently surrounded in Bastogne, cut off but still fighting. Their only lifeline was a narrow corridor of roads to the north, roads that ran through Noville. If this German column took Noville and its crossroads, that lifeline would be severed. The paratroopers would be completely isolated, their supplies exhausted, their position untenable. The math was simple and brutal. This German column, if unopposed, would doom thousands of American soldiers. Comment below your thoughts. Was Thompson right to consider breaking orders? What would you have done? And subscribe for more stories like this that explore the impossible decisions soldiers faced. Thompson studied the column through his periscope with the intensity of a chess master analyzing a board. The Tiger led from the front. Standard German doctrine: put your heaviest armor up front to smash through opposition. Behind it, 3 Panzer IVs in a tight line, then 2 half-tracks carrying infantry. Then support vehicles at the rear, including those critical fuel trucks that kept the column mobile. The formation was textbook perfect. On open ground, it would have been devastating. Tanks that could engage enemies from long range, infantry that could dismount and clear resistance, logistics that could sustain operations. It was exactly how German armor was supposed to operate, but they weren't on open ground. They were on a narrow forest road, barely wider than the vehicles themselves. Steep banks on either side, trees pressing close, no room to maneuver, no space to spread out if they took fire. To most observers, it was just a German column on a road. To Ray Thompson, it was a trap waiting to be sprung, and he was the only one in position to spring it. The road they were using curved through a valley, visible from Thompson's elevated position for maybe 800 yards before it bent behind trees. That meant Thompson had maybe 3 minutes, probably less, while the column was exposed in his field of fire. After that, they'd be gone, moving toward Noville, toward the crossroads, toward the cutting of the American lifeline. Thompson reached for his radio transmitter. Standard procedure: report enemy contact, wait for orders, let command decide how to respond. Maybe they'd send tank destroyers. Maybe artillery would be available. Maybe fighter bombers could hit the column once the weather cleared. Static. Nothing but static. The radio was dead. Whether from German jamming, atmospheric conditions, or equipment failure, Thompson didn't know, and it didn't matter. The result was the same. No communication with command. No way to request permission. No way to report what he was seeing. He was alone with the decision. His loader, a kid from Michigan named Davies, noticed Thompson's hesitation. "We calling it in, Sarge?" "Radio's dead. So we wait for it to clear?" Thompson didn't answer. He was calculating. The German column was moving at maybe 8 miles per hour through the snow. Careful, cautious but steady. At that speed, they'd be out of his effective firing range in approximately 240 seconds. 4 minutes. If he repositioned to try to get a signal, drove the M10 to higher ground where the radio might work, he'd lose visual contact with the column. By the time he reported and received orders, if orders came at all, the Germans would be long gone. But if he fired without orders, he was violating the most fundamental rule of military discipline. He could face court-martial. He could be stripped of rank, imprisoned, disgraced. And if he was wrong, if those vehicles were actually captured American equipment being moved by German troops, or if friendly forces were nearby and his fire brought down artillery on them, people could die because of his decision. Thompson's hands were shaking now, but not from cold. From the weight of choice, from understanding that the next few seconds would define everything, maybe his entire life, certainly the lives of those paratroopers in Bastogne who had no idea their survival might depend on what one tank destroyer gunner decided to do right now. He licked his lips, looked at the column again through the periscope, counted the vehicles one more time, studied their spacing, their formation, their vulnerabilities. Then he did something that would seem insane to anyone who didn't understand his thinking. He started calculating which vehicles to shoot and in which order. Not which ones posed the biggest threat, not which were easiest to hit, but which specific targets, struck in which specific sequence, would create maximum disruption and prevent the column from either escaping or mounting effective resistance. Third vehicle, then sixth, then eighth. That was the pattern. That was the sequence that would work. It was the kind of calculation you could only make if you'd spent months studying German tactics, understanding their logistics, learning how they organized their columns. The Tiger at the front was the obvious threat, but it wasn't the right first target. The support vehicles at the rear were the weakest links, but hitting them would let the combat vehicles escape. No, you had to hit the middle. Break the column into segments. Trap the lead elements where they couldn't maneuver while destroying the support that kept them operational. Turn their disciplined formation into a chaotic traffic jam where German training and experience would work against them. Thompson adjusted his gun's elevation, fine-tuning the angle for the 3rd Panzer IV in line. His hand rested on the firing trigger. His breath came slowly, deliberately. Davies watched him. "Sarge, what are we doing?" Thompson made his decision. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but with the cold, calculated certainty of a man who had done the mathematics and understood what was at stake. "We're breaking some rules," Thompson said quietly, and pulled the trigger. We're about to see how one man's unauthorized decision changed battlefield doctrine forever. Subscribe now so you don't miss part 2, and drop a like if you appreciate these deep dives into forgotten tactical genius. The armor-piercing round left the barrel of the M10, Wolverine with a thunderous roar that shattered the frozen silence of the Ardennes. The recoil rocked the entire vehicle. Snow and frost exploded off the camouflage netting. The muzzle flash lit up the fog like lightning, but Ray Thompson didn't aim for the obvious target. He didn't shoot at the Tiger I leading the column, the most dangerous threat, the tank that could kill him from 1,000 yards. He didn't shoot at the closest vehicle or the easiest shot. He aimed for the 3rd Panzer IV in line. The shell struck the Panzer's flank at a shallow angle, punching through the side armor where it was thinnest. The impact sent a shockwave through the vehicle's interior. Ammunition detonated. Fuel ignited. The Panzer lurched to a stop as flame and black smoke erupted from its hatches and engine compartment. The entire German column ground to a halt. Shocked, confused. 12 vehicles that had been moving in disciplined formation suddenly had a burning wreck in their midst. The Panzer IV sat right in the middle of the column, not at the front where it could be bypassed, not at the rear where the column could retreat, right in the middle blocking the narrow forest road. "Load!" Thompson shouted to Davies. His voice was calm, controlled, almost mechanical. This wasn't panic. This wasn't adrenaline. This was execution of a plan. Davies, hands shaking from adrenaline now flooding his system, rammed another shell into the breach. The smell of cordite filled the cramped crew compartment, but Thompson didn't fire immediately. Instead, he did something that would become the signature of his technique. He repositioned. He started the M10's engine and moved, not far, just 10 yards to the left, into a slightly different firing position under the tree cover. From the German perspective, they'd just been hit from one location. Now the next shot would come from a different angle. It would make them think there were multiple guns. It would sow confusion about exactly where the threat was coming from. Thompson sighted through his periscope again. The German column was in chaos. The Tiger at the front was trying to reverse, but vehicles were packed so tightly behind it that there was nowhere to go. German infantry were jumping out of half-tracks, taking cover, scanning the forest for the source of the attack. Thompson aimed at the sixth vehicle, a half-track full of infantry. These weren't the combat troops who would organize a defense. These were support personnel, engineers and logistics soldiers who would panic under fire. He fired. The shell hit the half-track dead center. The vehicle's thin armor offered no protection. The explosion tore through the cargo bay. Bodies were thrown into the trees. The fuel tank ignited with a secondary blast that sent flames spreading to the dry underbrush beneath the snow. Now the Germans weren't just stopped. They were trapped and burning. This tactical pattern was something the U.S. Army had never seen before. If this story is blowing your mind, please like this video and share it. These forgotten tactical innovations deserve to be known. Thompson repositioned again, 15 yards to the right this time, changing his angle of fire. Davies reloaded without being told. The loader's hands were blistered from the hot shells, but he didn't slow down. The crew was functioning now on pure instinct and trust in Thompson's decisions. The third shot targeted the eighth vehicle from the front, a fuel truck. This was the critical hit, the one that would seal the column's fate. The armor-piercing shell punched through the fuel truck's thin metal tank. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the gasoline ignited. The explosion was biblical. A massive fireball erupted skyward, flames jetting up through the fog like a volcanic blast. The force of the detonation knocked nearby infantry off their feet. Heat washed over adjacent vehicles, setting their canvas covers ablaze. Smoke billowed into the air, visible for miles. From a distance, it sounded like a full artillery barrage, multiple guns firing in coordination, a prepared ambush executed by a well-trained unit. In reality, it was one M10 tank destroyer, 3 shells fired in calculated sequence, and a gunner who understood something fundamental about German tactical doctrine that most Allied commanders had missed. The German column was finished. Not destroyed, many of the vehicles were still intact, but finished as a fighting force because Thompson's firing pattern had exploited the Germans' own strengths against them. German doctrine emphasized tight formations for mutual support. Vehicles stayed close together so they could cover each other, coordinate fire, and present a united front. It worked brilliantly in open terrain, but on this narrow forest road, that tight formation meant they couldn't maneuver when the column was disrupted. They were locked in place by their own training. By hitting the third vehicle, Thompson had created a physical roadblock. The lead elements, including that dangerous Tiger, couldn't advance without pushing the wreck aside, which would take time and expose them. By hitting the sixth vehicle, he'd trapped the middle of the column in a kill box between 2 burning wrecks. And by destroying the fuel truck at position 8, he'd eliminated their logistical support and created a massive fire that blocked any retreat. The Germans were boxed in, blinded by smoke, confused about enemy strength, and starting to panic. Thompson fired 3 more shots over the next 20 minutes, repositioning between each one. He hit a Panzer IV that was trying to maneuver around the wreckage. He destroyed a half-track that was attempting to reverse down the road. He struck the Tiger Y when it exposed its flank while trying to pivot its massive hull. The Tiger's destruction was the culmination of Thompson's geometric understanding. The Tiger. I was nearly invulnerable from the front. Its armor was too thick for the M10's gun. But Thompson had studied Tiger tactics exhaustively. He knew the exact angles at which the side armor was weakest. He knew how long it took for the massive tank to turn. and he waited for the precise moment when the Tiger's driver, frustrated and desperate, tried to maneuver the 60-ton tank on the narrow road. The shell caught the Tiger just behind the turret. In a seam where the armor was slightly thinner, the round penetrated. Internal ammunition cooked off. The entire turret lifted off the hull in a gout of flame, landing several yards away with a sound like thunder. German soldiers who witnessed it would later say it looked like the hand of God had plucked the turret off the tank. Comment below. Did you know about tactical firing patterns before this video? This kind of battlefield innovation changed how armies think. Subscribe for more untold military history. By the 30-minute mark, the forest road looked like the aftermath of an airstrike. 5 vehicles completely destroyed, 3 more disabled and burning. German infantry scattered into the trees, abandoning their equipment. Smoke poured into the sky like a signal fire visible for miles. The German survivors, those who hadn't been killed or run off into the forest, tried to return fire. Machine gunners riddled the tree line with bullets, hitting empty positions where Thompson had been minutes earlier. One German officer, braver or more foolish than the rest, climbed on top of a disabled Panzer to get a better view. Thompson's coaxial machine gun cut him down before he could direct effective fire. The Germans were shooting at ghosts. They couldn't locate Thompson's actual position because he kept moving. They couldn't coordinate their response because their command structure had broken down along with their column. And they couldn't retreat because the road behind them was blocked by burning wreckage. German doctrine had no answer for this. They'd been trained to fight Allied tank formations, to engage in mobile warfare, to use their superior tactics and experience. But Thompson hadn't fought them like an American tank unit. He'd fought them like a sniper, invisible, mobile, striking with precision and then vanishing before they could respond. The Germans, trained and experienced as they were, simply couldn't adapt to what was happening. Their minds couldn't accept that one gun was doing this. The final German vehicles that were still mobile, support trucks and the self-propelled anti-aircraft gun at the rear, simply turned around and fled back the way they'd come. They left their comrades, abandoned their mission, and ran. Thompson watched them go through his periscope. He didn't fire. They were no longer a threat. The column was broken. The road to Noville would remain open. Davies, the loader, broke the silence. Did we just do that? Thompson didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the destruction they'd caused, the smoke and flame and twisted metal. His hands, he noticed, were shaking now. The adrenaline was catching up with him. Yeah, he finally said quietly. We did that. Then reality set in. They'd just violated direct orders. They'd fired without permission. And sooner or later, they'd have to answer for it. Several hours after the guns fell silent, American scouts from the 101st Airborne found the wreckage. They'd been sent north from Bastogne, desperately trying to determine if the supply corridor was still open or if German forces had cut them off completely. What they found stunned them. The forest road was littered with destroyed German armor. Panzer IVs and half-tracks burned out. A Tiger I with its turret blown clean off. Bodies in the snow. Equipment abandoned. The unmistakable signs of a devastating ambush. But here's what was strange. There were no American casualties. Not one. No knocked-out American tanks. No destroyed tank destroyers. No friendly vehicles at all except Thompson's lone M10, still hidden on the ridge under its camouflage netting. The scouts radioed back to their command. Road is clear. German column destroyed. Recommend immediate resupply convoy. When asked what unit had conducted the engagement, the scouts couldn't answer. They didn't know. There was no sign of a major American force in the area. This is the part where Thompson's tactical genius meets military bureaucracy. Hit that subscribe button to see how this story ends. You won't believe what happened next. Meanwhile, on the German side, survivors were being questioned by their own commanders. The interrogations revealed something extraordinary. The Germans thought they'd been ambushed by an entire American tank destroyer battalion. A captured German lieutenant, his face blackened by smoke and his hands shaking from shock, insisted there had been many guns, maybe 6, maybe 8, firing from different positions. He swore he'd seen muzzle flashes from multiple angles, heard the distinctive reports of several tank guns engaging in coordinated fire. Another prisoner claimed the Americans had set a trap with mines and obstacles, that the ambush had been carefully planned and expertly executed. He described seeing American armor moving through the trees, multiple vehicles, working in concert. A third German soldier, a veteran Panzer commander who'd fought in Russia and North Africa, said flatly, "This was professional, methodical. They knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some green American unit. This was specialists." None of them could believe it was one gun, one M10, one crew, one gunner who'd never fired without orders before in his life. The German reports created what intelligence officers later called the Ghost Battery, Die Geister Battery. German command believed there was an elite American tank destroyer unit operating in the Noville sector, a specialized force using advanced tactics to disrupt German operations. They never discovered the truth. It was Ray Thompson, a farm kid from Kansas who'd broken the rules and gotten insanely lucky, or maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was something else. Understanding, preparation, the willingness to act when action was needed. Either way, the Germans adjusted their tactics in that sector, avoiding forest roads, spreading their formations wider, moving more cautiously, all because of a ghost battery that existed only in their fears. For 48 hours, Ray Thompson expected to be arrested. He expected military police to arrive, place him in handcuffs, and escort him to a court-martial hearing where he'd be charged with gross insubordination and reckless endangerment. After the engagement ended, Thompson and his crew sat in the M10 in total silence. The adrenaline had drained away, replaced by exhaustion and a creeping dread. They'd won the battle, but possibly lost everything else. Davies, the loader, finally broke the silence. "They're going to crucify us, aren't they?" Thompson didn't have an answer. He just sat there, staring at his hands, wondering if he'd made the right choice or the worst mistake of his life. When they finally returned to battalion headquarters, Thompson filed his report. He didn't try to hide what he'd done or make excuses. He documented everything in his careful, precise way: the German column composition, the decision to fire without orders, the sequence of his shots, the results. He included his sketches, his range calculations, his tactical reasoning. Captain Langston read the report without saying a word. He flipped through the pages: Thompson's diagrams, his notes, his meticulous documentation of the unauthorized engagement. Langston's face was unreadable, cycling between anger and disbelief and something else Thompson couldn't quite identify. Finally, Langston spoke. "You know, Thompson, if this had gone wrong, if even one of those had been friendly fire..." Thompson nodded. "I know, sir. I did the calculations. I was certain of target identification." "You were certain," Langston repeated, his voice flat. "Based on what? Your notebook full of sketches?" "Based on 6 months of observation, sir. I knew what I was seeing." Langston stared at him for a long moment. "You understand that I have to send this up the chain. Division Command needs to know that we have an enlisted man making tactical decisions without authorization." "I understand, sir." The tension here is incredible. Thompson could have been court-martialed and imprisoned. If you want to see how this impossible situation resolved, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. But the hammer didn't fall, not immediately, because something happened that changed everything. The scouts from the 101st Airborne submitted their own report. Those paratroopers had been surrounded in Bastogne for days, running low on ammunition and medical supplies, expecting at any moment to be completely cut off. When they found that forest road clear, found that a German armored column that should have taken Noville had been destroyed, it meant their supply line remained open. It meant trucks could still reach them. It meant they could hold out. The 101st's commander specifically noted in his after-action report that an unidentified American unit had conducted a successful defensive engagement north of Noville, destroying or disabling 12 German vehicles and preventing enemy forces from cutting the Bastogne corridor. Division. Intelligence reviewed Thompson's report alongside the First's report and the interrogation records from captured German soldiers. The picture that emerged was extraordinary. One tank destroyer had held a critical position, destroyed a significant enemy force, and done so with 0 friendly casualties. Then something unexpected happened. Word spread, not through official channels but through the unofficial network that soldiers have always used. Mess tents, supply lines, field radios. The story of the guy from Kansas who took out a Panzer column by himself started making the rounds. Some soldiers exaggerated, said it was 20 tanks, said Thompson had done it with 3 shells using trick shots, said he'd taken on the entire German army single-handed. But beneath the exaggeration was a core truth that everyone recognized. One man had broken the rules and saved lives doing it. Captain Langston was called to division headquarters. He expected to discuss disciplinary action. What he got instead was a 2-hour meeting with intelligence officers who wanted to understand exactly how Thompson had achieved such results. They asked about his training, his background, his methods. They reviewed his notebook, the sketches and calculations that Thompson had been keeping for months. They studied his firing pattern, trying to understand the logic behind his target selection. One colonel, a career artillery officer, looked at Thompson's diagrams and said something that would prove prophetic. "This isn't random. This is systematic. He's exploiting German tactical doctrine against them." The decision came down from division command. No court-martial, no official reprimand, but Thompson was to be reassigned, not as punishment, but to train other tank destroyer crews. They wanted him to teach what he'd done, to systematize it, to turn his unauthorized battlefield innovation into official doctrine. Langston delivered the news to Thompson in private. "You're not being court-martialed," he said. "You're being promoted. Well, not formally promoted in rank, but they want you to teach this." Thompson was stunned. "Teach what, sir?" "Whatever it is you did out there. They're calling it engagement sequencing or pattern disruption or some other bullshit name. But what they mean is, you figured out how to destroy an armored column with 1 gun, and they want every tank destroyer crew in Europe to learn how to do the same thing. This is where one man's split-second decision becomes military doctrine that's still taught today. Drop a comment about whether you think he deserved a medal. And subscribe. We're just getting to the most important part. Over the next few months, Ray Thompson found himself doing something he'd never imagined: teaching tactics to officers. He was still just a private first class, but he was briefing captains and majors on how to analyze enemy formations and identify critical vulnerabilities. He explained his thinking process, how he'd studied German doctrine and noticed that their tight formations, while effective in open terrain, became a liability in confined spaces. How hitting specific vehicles in a specific sequence could cascade into total column disruption. How movement between shots created the illusion of multiple attackers. The Army began calling it asymmetric engagement sequencing, typical military jargon for a simple concept. Don't just shoot at targets. Understand how destroying specific targets in specific orders can collapse entire enemy formations. Thompson's field notes were copied and distributed to tank destroyer battalions across Europe. His diagrams appeared in training materials. His tactical analysis was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the U.S. Army's artillery school, where instructors studied his approach and incorporated elements of it into their curriculum. The irony wasn't lost on Thompson. He'd violated direct orders. He'd done exactly what he'd been told not to do. And the Army's response was to make him an informal consultant on independent battlefield decision-making. Years later, a military historian would write, "Thompson's engagement demonstrated that rigid command and control doctrine could be counterproductive. Sometimes the soldier on the ground has information and opportunities that command cannot see. The challenge is teaching soldiers when to follow orders and when to trust their own judgment, a paradox that has never been fully resolved." During the Cold War, Thompson's techniques were studied as part of NATO's defensive planning against potential Soviet armored offensives in Europe. The Soviet Army, like the German Army before it, emphasized tight formations and coordinated movements. Thompson's approach, using precision to create cascading failures in those formations, was seen as a potential force multiplier for outnumbered NATO forces. Tank. Destroyer doctrine evolved to emphasize positioning, timing, and target prioritization over simple firepower. The concept of fighting smart instead of fighting hard became embedded in armored warfare training. But the man himself never sought recognition. Ray Thompson was quietly transferred back to a standard tank destroyer crew after several months of training duty. He fought through the rest of the war in Europe, participated in the advance into Germany, and was present when Germany surrendered in May 1945. He came home to Kansas that summer, married a woman named Helen from the next town over, and opened a small repair shop in Dodge City. He fixed tractors, built grain silos, and taught his son mathematics by drawing angles in the dirt with a stick. He never called himself a hero. When people asked about his war service, he'd say he'd been a gunner in a tank destroyer unit. Nothing more. He didn't mention the unauthorized engagement, didn't talk about the Panzer column, didn't display any military memorabilia in his shop. The fact that Thompson never sought glory makes this story even more powerful. If you agree, give this video a like and subscribe. We tell the stories the heroes themselves won't tell. It wasn't until the 1980s, when a military historian researching Battle of the Bulge engagements stumbled across Thompson's original after-action report in a dusty archive box, that the story began to emerge into public awareness. The historian, intrigued by the extraordinary claims in the report, tracked down Thompson, now in his 80s, retired, slightly deaf, living in a modest home with his wife and a cat named Murphy. He asked Thompson about that day in December 1944, about the decision to fire without orders, about how it felt to break the rules and watch the consequences unfold. Thompson took a long time to answer. Finally, he said, "I remember how quiet it was. Before I fired that first shot, the forest was completely still, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do." He paused, looking at his weathered hands. "I didn't fire because I was brave or because I wanted glory. I fired because I could see what was going to happen if I didn't. Sometimes you can do the math. You can see the pattern, and if you can see it, you can't pretend you don't." The historian asked why Thompson had never sought recognition or told his story. "Because it wasn't about me," Thompson replied simply. "It was about doing what needed to be done. The Army eventually figured that out. That's why they didn't court-martial me. But I already knew it. Sometimes following orders means having the judgment to know when orders don't apply." That answer never made it into the mainstream history books, but it captured something essential about Ray Thompson and about the deeper nature of military discipline. Rules exist for good reasons, but understanding the reasons behind the rules is more important than blindly following them. Today, Thompson's engagement is studied at military academies as a case study in tactical initiative, not to encourage soldiers to disobey orders, but to illustrate that warfare is fundamentally about making decisions under uncertainty, and that sometimes the person closest to the problem has the best view of the solution. The lesson isn't break the rules. The lesson is understand what you're trying to achieve and make decisions that serve that goal, even when those decisions are difficult, even when they violate protocol, even when they put your career at risk. Final CTA. If this story changed how you think about military discipline and individual initiative, please share this video. These forgotten tactical innovations shaped how modern militaries operate. Subscribe for more untold stories that changed warfare forever. Ray Thompson died in 1999 at age 77. His obituary in the local Kansas newspaper mentioned that he'd been a veteran, a small business owner, and a devoted husband and father. It didn't mention the Panzer column. It didn't mention the Ghost battery. It didn't mention that his unauthorized firing pattern became required study at Fort Sill. But in the archives of the U.S. Army, in the training materials used at military schools, in the tactical manuals that guide tank destroyer operations, Ray Thompson's influence remains. Not his name, the materials typically don't identify him directly, but his thinking, his approach, his willingness to see patterns that others missed and to act on what he saw. One gunner, one decision, one firing pattern, and an entire German armored column brought to its knees. Not through firepower or superior equipment or numerical advantage, but through precision, through understanding, through the courage to make the hard choice when the hard choice was the right choice. Sometimes war rewards those who follow the rules. But sometimes, just sometimes, it rewards those who understand that rules are tools, not chains. That discipline includes the discipline to think. That following orders means understanding what the orders are trying to accomplish and doing whatever it takes to accomplish it. Ray Thompson understood that. And on December 19, 1944, in a frozen forest in Belgium, he proved it with 3 well-aimed shots that changed everything.